On Ukraine and on how to expand our partnerships, in particular with our partners in the Asia Pacific. On Ukraine, I expect allies to agree a substantial package which will consist of 5 elements. One is a NATO command for Ukraine to provide security assistance and training. A long-term pledge to continue and sustain our support to Ukraine. New announcements of immediate military support, including air defense, and new bilateral security agreements between NATO allies and Ukraine. And then finally, that we will step up what we do to ensure full interoperability between the Ukrainian forces and NATO forces, including with a new training and evaluation center in Poland. Altogether, these 5 elements constitute a strong bridge for Ukraine to membership of the alliance. And I'm confident that allies will then reiterate the commitment that Ukraine will become a member of NATO. On deterrence and defense, we will ensure that we have the forces in place to meet the requirements in our new, very ambitious defense plans. We already have 500,000 troops on high readiness in NATO, the highest in decades. We will also integrate a new ballistic defense site in Poland into our air and ballistic missile integrated system. Of course, the most important thing is that we now see that allies are stepping up when it comes to defense investments. We made the pledge 10 years ago at the NATO summit in 2014 that allies should spend 2% of GDP on defense. At that time, only 3 allies spent 2% or more on defense. This year, 23 allies will spend 2% or more of GDP on defense. And this makes a big difference and demonstrates that allies are taking security extremely serious. The last thing I would say is that we will also then meet with the heads of state and government from our Asia-Pacific partners, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and South Korea. And the war in Ukraine demonstrates how our security is interlinked, because Iran, North Korea, and China are the main enablers of Russia's war against Ukraine. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. First of all, congratulations on your Presidential Medal of Freedom, sir. Well deserved. Sir, it's so apt that we are in Washington, D.C., and no one coming into the country can ignore the feverish speculation and questioning around the leadership at the moment. Even Volodymyr Zelensky has very, very grave concerns about US politicians waiting to offer their support on both sides of the House before the November election. How much does the alliance hang in the balance? I remember full well you being lambasted, sir, in Brussels in 2018 by the then President, Mr. Trump, as well, about European defence. We're all waiting on the election. Is that very dangerous for the North Atlantic Alliance?
I expect that regardless of the outcome of the US elections, the US will remain a strong and staunch NATO ally for 3 reasons. One is that it is in the US security interest to have a strong NATO. NATO is good for Europe, but it's also good for the United States. It makes the United States stronger and safer, because in NATO, the United States has something no other major power has, and that is more than 30 friends and allies. Russia doesn't have that, China doesn't have that. The United States has NATO, makes the United States stronger. The second reason why I believe that the United States will remain a strong ally is that it is broad bipartisan support for NATO in the United States. There are just now new opinion polls demonstrating the broad support for NATO among US voters, but also in the US Congress. I will later on today go to the US Senate, and in the US Congress there is strong bipartisan support for NATO. And thirdly, the main criticism from former President Trump and also from others against NATO has actually not primarily been against NATO. It has been against NATO allies not spending enough on NATO. And this has really changed. Just over the last years, we have seen a dramatic increase in defense spending across Europe and Canada. and a record high number of allies are now meeting the target of spending 2%, and those allies who are not yet there, they have clear plans in place to be at 2% soon. So this has, for these reasons, US security interest is to have a strong NATO, strong bipartisan support, and that European allies are stepping up, investing more. I expect that the United States will remain a strong ally regardless of the outcome of the elections.
Thank you, Secretary General. Should Ukraine's path to NATO be irreversible, and should this be explicitly mentioned in the summit declaration? And another question, if I may, is this summit the opportunity to finally deliver all 7 requested air defense systems to Ukraine?
First, on the exact language, I expect that allies will agree a strong message on membership for Ukraine. The exact language I will refrain to comment on until we have the statement agreed. It's negotiated as we speak. I'm confident that we'll agree a statement later on today, and then I can go into the details about the language. It's a relevant question to ask, but I will be able to answer it more in detail soon. On air defense, President Zelensky spoke to NATO defense ministers in April. That was when he asked for more air defense capabilities. We promised to work hard on that, and allies have worked hard. I have worked, and NATO leaders have engaged, and we have now the announcement by President Biden and several other allies yesterday that they will be able to deliver 5 new advanced strategic air defense systems from the United States, from Italy, from Romania, from the Netherlands, and also from one more ally. And of course, this is a significant contribution. On top of that, we will also then ensure that they will have more tactical air defense systems, including NASAMS. So we are constantly working on how we can deliver more. I think that the announcement that was made by President Biden yesterday is significant, but we'll continue to see if we can add even more on top of that.
Thank you, Secretary. This is Song Sang, reporter from Yonhap News Agency, South Korea. South Korea's cooperation with NATO has been growing. So how do you think this cooperative partnership between South Korea and NATO will help counter the deepening alignment between North Korea and Russia? And how this kind of cooperation partnership will help enhance security on the Korean Peninsula? Thank you.
I will answer that in a moment, but let me just add that, of course, Germany is also on the list of the allies that have provided additional Patriot systems for Ukraine after the call was made by President Zelensky in April. Germany was actually the first to announce. South Korea is an important partner. I look forward to meet the South Korean president tomorrow. We will have a meeting with our Asia-Pacific partners. I will have a bilateral meeting also with the president of South Korea. The war in Ukraine demonstrates how our security is interlinked. Because North Korea is actually one of the main providers of military support, of ammunition to Russia to enable them to conduct a war of aggression against Ukraine in the heart of Europe. And of course, we are deeply concerned about what is Russia giving in return. Putin just met with the North Korean leader. We know that North Korea and Russia are coming closer and closer, also signed the defense pact. So this demonstrates how what happens in Europe matters for Asia, Korea, and what happens in Asia and Korea matters for Europe. So we are looking at how we can work more closely together, including when it comes to expanding together defense industry cooperation. You have advanced, South Korea has advanced defense industry. I think there's great potential to do more together on technology, on cyber, and also we are looking into how we can have better systems and methods for exchange of information, because that will help to strengthen the security both of South Korea and of NATO allies. So we are working on a wide range of areas. We will agree also some flagship projects to further expand the cooperation between South Korea and NATO.
Greta Karvala, Iltalehti Finland. What is the main reason that Ukraine cannot be NATO member yet. And if I may, is Russia emerging threat to NATO's eastern flank, and can we expect that war escalates?
We don't see any imminent military threat against any NATO ally, and Russia is now fully preoccupied with the war against Ukraine. And they have moved a lot of forces also from along the border between Russia and Finland down to Ukraine. So we don't see any imminent military threat against any NATO ally. What we see is, of course, a constant threat of cyber attacks, of sabotage, of different types of hostile actions against NATO allies, but short of military attacks, because Russia is so preoccupied with the war in Ukraine. But of course we need to be vigilant. We monitor closely what Russia is doing, and NATO allies are investing heavily in new modern defense capabilities. And just the fact that we now have Finland and Sweden as members, that has made NATO stronger and Finland and Sweden safer. Finland brings very capable forces, well-equipped, well-trained forces to our alliance, and the fact that Finland is now a member makes it also, of course, easy to do defense planning in the Nordic area, but also with the Baltic countries. So that was the second question. What was the first?
Ukraine cannot be...
No, well, so, as you know, to have a new ally, to invite a new ally, we need consensus. All allies agree that Ukraine will become a member, but it's too early to say exactly when that will happen. What I can say is that we are moving together with Ukraine closer and closer to NATO membership, and we do that by concrete actions, because Ukraine's membership is of course partly about the language, the wording. We will agree later today in the NATO declaration about membership for Ukraine, but it's also very much about the concrete actions we are taking to move Ukraine closer to membership. And the fact that we now will have a NATO command with 700 people based in Germany at the NATO command there, but also at hubs in the eastern part of the alliance to facilitate training and security assistance to Ukraine. That will give a stronger NATO framework basis for what we do, and also help to move Ukraine closer to our membership. The long-term financial pledge, everything we do on interoperability. When NATO allies are delivering F-16s, for instance, to Ukraine, we also deliver training, doctrines, and all of that are examples how we are moving Ukraine closer to NATO and making it easier for them to become a member when the time is right.
Thank you, Elina Kervinen for Helsingin Sanomat, Finland. Secretary General, you mentioned the Russian sabotage campaign. Just yesterday we read that US military bases across Europe were placed on heightened alert because of a possible threat. What concrete is NATO doing to prevent this kind of actions, and what will be the message from this summit? Thank you.
I will not comment on that specific incident. It's correct that the US has increased alert levels for some of their bases, but it's for the US to comment on that specific incident. What I can say is that we have seen a pattern of increased Russian hostile acts against NATO allies over the last months, organized by the Russian security services. And this is about sabotage, this is about cyber attacks, this is about arson attempts, this is about different types of malign actions against NATO allies. And what NATO has done, and what we are doing is that, first of all, we are stepping up awareness. We are making allies aware of that these are not standalone incidents, but this is part of a Russian campaign to try to intimidate us from supporting Ukraine. So increased awareness. Second, more intelligence sharing. The fact that we now also have arrests in UK, in Poland, in Germany, in some of the Baltic countries of people who are accused of standing behind these sabotage, different sabotage or malign activities, is to some extent also the concrete outcome of exchange of intelligence between NATO allies. So stepping up the sharing of intelligence is a second thing we do. And thirdly, it's also important to realize that what NATO does to help allies improve their cyber defenses is important, because much of this is taking place in cyberspace, and also to counter disinformation, because it's a variety of different hostile actions ranging from disinformation to concrete sabotage attempts. We are vigilant, we are monitoring closely what Russia is doing, and of course many of the actions have to be taken by individual allies. The arrests that have taken place across the alliance are taken by national police authorities, and there are ongoing legal processes across the alliance.
Okay, thank you all very much. Thank you, Secretary General.
Thank you.
Good morning. Please, questions, yeah.
Sir, how far has the alliance come in getting 23 members out of 32 to that minimum defence spending? Does it answer the criticisms of the potential next President of the United States, Donald Trump?
Well, I think it's a major development over the last years. Europe acknowledging that individual states should contribute more. I can tell you it takes some tough decisions in a national setting to prioritize that money. For Norway's part, we were among the countries that had not reached 2%, and we did not have a plan for it. So when my government took over, we decided first to have the plan. And now, as of the mid this year, we are beyond 2%, and we will be heading to 3% into the next decade. But it has to be matched with, good investments. So it's part of our revamping of our defense structure, in particular the maritime dimension of it, which is costly. But now that plan is laid, and it has a broad, unanimous support in Parliament.
How safe does Scandinavia feel now you have additional members of traditionally neutral powers, Finland and Sweden?
Well, Finland and Sweden took their choice to seek their security inside that collective security of NATO. I think it makes them more secure. They will also be net contributors to security in the broader alliance. That you have all the 5 Nordics together in NATO is the first time, if you take a large historic perspective, for many hundred years. It makes coordination across borders in the north and the south easier. I had the Swedish Prime Minister and Finnish President with me in the north of Norway 2 weeks ago to start discussions on how we will develop our communication east-west and not only north-south. Because you have the huge maritime dimension facing Norway, and then you have Sweden and Finland with inland challenges. So I think it is making NATO in the north stronger and more coherent. Well, I mean, we have a statement all the way back from 2008. We have the NATO support coming to Ukraine over these last 2 dramatic years. So I think the path that Ukraine is seeking to belong to the western part of this Euro-Atlantic community through EU integration and eventually through NATO membership will be written in our texts. I don't see that there will be an invitation coming out of the NATO summit here, but every other indication will point towards that future. Well, we are 32 democracies, and there are always elections in democracies some year. And making strong unity among democracies is seldom straightforward, but when you make it, it is extremely strong. And I think it is strong now, you know, a strong commonality of purpose on Ukraine, on our new regional plans for defense, on our, you know, broader outlook in a world where we face authoritarian leaders, groups, states who are really challenging our core values. And I want NATO at 75 to be as unified as it was NATO at 12 in 1949. Norway has been members since then. And I think everything we have seen in the preparation for Washington, the text you will see out of Washington, on new plans, on new commitments, on Ukraine, will send a strong signal of unity. Thank you.
¿Qué tal? Buenos días a los medios de comunicación españoles, buenos días a todos y a todas. Bueno, yo creo que es importante la celebración de este 75 aniversario del nacimiento de esta alianza, de la Alianza Atlántica, de la OTAN. Y ese sería el primer mensaje que me gustaría trasladar, ¿no? Un mensaje de vigencia de una alianza al servicio de unos ciudadanos que a lo largo de estos 75 años y particularmente en estos últimos años han sido muy conscientes del valor que entraña la seguridad. No solamente en el aspecto de las guerras convencionales que por desgracia estamos volviendo a sufrir en Europa, en el flanco este, en Ucrania, como consecuencia de la invasión de Putin, sino también como consecuencia de la permanencia de organizaciones terroristas, de organizaciones también criminales con una dimensión transnacional, o los efectos ante el cambio climático y los desastres naturales que ello implica. Y por supuesto no quiero dejar de olvidar los riesgos que entrañan, además del desarrollo económico, los riesgos que entrañan todo el mundo digital y por tanto la ciberseguridad frente a los ciberataques. Por tanto, creo que el primero de los mensajes tiene que ser de vigencia y por tanto de celebración de una alianza atlántica que cumple 75 años y a la cual, por supuesto, todos los aliados, y estoy convencido de que todos los ciudadanos a los que representamos los presidentes y presidentas de gobierno, les deseamos una larga vida a esta alianza atlántica. En segundo lugar, el mensaje creo que es el mensaje de solidaridad con un pueblo, en este caso Ucrania, que está sufriendo el embate de una guerra injusta, ilegal, absolutamente injustificada, porque Ucrania no era una amenaza para el régimen de Putin en Rusia. Y, como ayer dijo el presidente Biden, antes del inicio de la guerra, Ucrania era un país libre e independiente. Y después de la guerra, gracias también a la solidaridad del conjunto de los países aliados, Ucrania continuará siendo un país libre e independiente. Y esto creo que es muy importante recordarlo siempre. Lo hemos dicho, yo particularmente también a la ciudadanía española desde el principio de la invasión de Putin hacia Ucrania, que Ucrania lo que está haciendo no es solamente defender su integridad territorial, no es solamente defender su derecho a existir, que se está poniendo en cuestión por parte de Putin, no es solamente su derecho a decidir libremente qué quieren ser en el futuro, es algo mucho más profundo y es la defensa de un orden internacional basado en reglas, de la defensa también del derecho internacional que está siendo menoscabado como consecuencia de esta guerra ilegal, injusta e injustificada, y finalmente la defensa de unos valores democráticos de ciudadanía libre que están puestos en cuestión como consecuencia de la guerra de Putin en Ucrania. Por tanto, creo que es muy importante lo que va a suceder hoy. También las palabras ayer del secretario general Stoltenberg y del presidente Biden de compromiso, de solidaridad para con una ciudadanía, un país que está viendo en riesgo su propia existencia como consecuencia del imperialismo, en este caso del presidente Putin. Y finalmente, y esto para España es importante porque lo empezamos a desarrollar en la cumbre de la OTAN en Madrid, la necesidad también de un mayor compromiso por parte de la OTAN y de los aliados respecto al flanco sur. Saben ustedes que está la estrategia de 360 grados. Es verdad que, por desgracia, la inestabilidad, los efectos del cambio climático, el auge de dictaduras en detrimento de democracias en una parte muy importante, por ejemplo, para España, como es el Sahel, está haciendo que la presencia rusa cada vez sea mayor, que hay una mayor presencia de organizaciones terroristas o de organizaciones criminales que trafican con seres humanos y que están detrás, en buena medida, de pues todos aquellos fenómenos migratorios irregulares que, por desgracia, está sufriendo el Mediterráneo en estos últimos años. Creo que es importante el mensaje que vamos a trasladar. Creo que es muy relevante que después de la cumbre de Vilnius el año pasado en Lituania se celebrara un grupo de trabajo que nos va a presentar en el día de hoy un plan de acción de la OTAN hacia el sur, que evidentemente es de un interés absolutamente estratégico y fundamental para España. Por tanto, yo creo que estos son los tres mensajes que me gustaría trasladar. Primero, el de vigencia total y absoluta en el 75 aniversario de la OTAN de esta organización, de esta alianza atlántica, reforzando esos vínculos transatlánticos entre Europa y Estados Unidos y Canadá. En segundo lugar, el de la solidaridad con Ucrania, y el tercero, el del compromiso con el flanco sur, en definitiva, con todo aquello que para España es fundamental, como es la estabilidad y el desarrollo del Mediterráneo. Y un último apunte. Me van a permitir que, lógicamente, celebre la victoria de España ayer ante Francia y, por tanto, el pase de la selección española de fútbol a la final de la Eurocopa. Vamos a ver exactamente contra quién nos vamos a enfrentar, aunque viendo y leyendo los medios de comunicación, tanto nacionales como internacionales, es evidente que la selección española se ha ganado a pulso su condición de favorita. Y creo que efectivamente hay que celebrar y felicitar a un equipo de jugadores que han demostrado eso, ser equipo. Y eso significa ser solidarios, pensar en el conjunto, en el equipo y no en las individualidades, aunque evidentemente la calidad de muchos de los jugadores pues es extraordinaria, y desearles lo mejor, porque, como dije ayer en las redes sociales, está todo el país detrás de ellos. Estamos todos los españoles y españolas súper orgullosos del equipo nacional que tenemos y, desde luego, con una expectativa muy grande de que el próximo domingo podamos convertirnos en campeones de Europa. Bueno, muchísimas gracias.
morning. It's great to be here. It is good that only a festive moment, but something that we really into different subjects as well. First, what is very important is that Ukraine is center. We must do everything
to prevail for Ukrainian victory. That means that we have to provide them assistance. Then second thing is that NATO is declaring Russia as a long-term threat, and we have to work on the containment and contest of Russian aggressive activities. Then third and fourth, very intertwined. This is the defense that we are doing, the collective defense that we are doing for ourselves. We have the military plans, but they have to also be full of the capabilities that we need from the NATO allies, and that means that we also have to invest more to defense. I'm also happy that already 23 countries are investing more than 2% of the GDP to defense. Estonia is doing over 3% this year, so after Poland we are the country that does most for this, but we need all to do more. That is very clear. And the fifth point is, of course, that the defense has to have this 360 degrees approach. The threats that are coming from the south are equally threatening for our continent. So these are the topics that we're going to discuss today. So thank you.
Congratulations on your nomination of the EU. What is your #1 priority when you become the EU Foreign Policy Supremo? Thank you very much indeed.
Excuse me. Should I speak Czech or English? Okay. I would like to mention yesterday a celebratory meeting to open this year's summit with two keynote speakers, being Secretary General and President Biden. Secretary General stated that despite all the differences that we faced in the past years, this alliance proved to be not only longest lasting, but also the most successful alliance in the world and human history. I believe that as we see it as the sphere of cooperation, the sphere of security, these arguments are true. Then we saw within the speech of President Biden a number of strong statements vis-à-vis Ukraine that were clearly stating that not only the path towards NATO membership is irreversible, but also that we collectively will not let Ukraine fall down. I think.
How concerned are you about the lack of air defences for the central and eastern flank as well, which your country is such a large part of as well? We look woefully underprepared, according to the latest statistics.
Well, First, I would divide this issue into two lines. First is the most urgent, that is provision of air defense to Ukraine. And President Biden announced the initiative of 5 countries to provide necessary systems as soon as possible. And second, in short and mid-term, is the enforcement of air defense within the eastern flank. And that will be part of a new phase of NATO defense planning process, where all the countries will receive new capability targets, including air defense.
Many leaders within this alliance seem to be like immensely weakened at the moment. Do you think this summit is still able to send a strong signal towards Moscow?
I believe so, because there is a unanimous agreement on declaration that is quite straightforward, not only pointing to the fact that Russia is the most urgent security challenge to all of us, but also the need of supporting Ukraine as long as it takes. Pokud nedojde k nějakému dalšímu neočekávanému vývoji, tak to slovo tam bude. Je to důležité proto, že pro ukrajinské občany, ukrajinské ozbrojené síly je mimořádně důležité udržovat vysoký morál a k tomu potřebují perspektivu. Ta perspektiva je právě daná tím, že proces bude označen za nezvratný. Musím říct, že až překvapivě shoda na všech zásadních tématech. Já si myslím, že často je potřeba odhlédnout od některých titulků a věnovat se obsahu. A když jsme se bavili o obsahu těch hlavních témat, tak tam se v naprosté většině shodneme. Ať už se to týká Ukrajiny, vztahu k Rusku, Číně, případně provázanosti bezpečnostních problematik globálně. V tom všem jsme se shodli. O tom nepadlo ani slovo. My jsme se nebavili o konkrétních projektech, bavili jsme se o těch hlavních politických a bezpečnostních prioritách. Děkuji.
Good morning. Just a couple of words to kick off with. My Foreign Minister and Defense Minister will be here in a second as well. It's a great privilege to be here in my first NATO summit as President of the Republic of Finland. My first observation is to say that NATO has now doubled its border with Russia. And Russia is the biggest threat to the alliance. We in Finland fully understand the responsibility that we have as a new member state. We are very serious about our defense, have been so ever since World War II. You will see us as a security provider, not a security consumer. We hit all the targets set by the alliance. You will know that we have obligatory military service and 900,000 men and women that have done their service. We have 280,000 that we can mobilize at wartime. We have 62 F-18s, 64 F-35s, land, air, sea missiles, and the biggest artillery in Europe together with Poland. And there's a reason why we have that. We want to protect ourselves and we want to protect the alliance. As far as the summit is concerned, we're very happy with the final declaration and the outcome that we will see, especially on 2 accounts. One is defense and deterrence. We are seeing now, I would argue, the rebirth of NATO 3.0, a real Zeitenwende for the alliance, where we're putting our mouth where our money is, and we're showing that our operative capacity, our planning capacity, and in general our capacity is right there. And secondly, we are extremely happy about the language that we're getting in supporting Ukraine. It is, of course, for us, the most important conflict close to our border, and the support that we are giving Ukraine in terms of making it in the future into a NATO member, in terms of financial and military assistance, and in terms of coordinating assistance is extremely important. I think it's very important to give a message to the Kremlin from here that Ukraine's path and bridge towards NATO membership is now irreversible, and in that sense I'm happy to be here celebrating the 75th anniversary of the strongest military alliance in the history of the world. With these words, I'm happy to take my foreign minister and defense minister and then answer questions.
Just a quick word, sir.
Yeah.
If Mr. Putin isn't stopped in Ukraine, do you fear that the Baltic Sea is the next target? I know the Baltic nations are very concerned about the presence of Russia on their borders.
We don't fear anything. We plan for everything. That means that we look at different types of scenarios. But to be honest, I think the turns that we have right now, Finland, Sweden, Norway, all of us being part of the alliance, I don't think it makes any sense for Russia to make any kind of a move towards that direction. The Baltic Sea is now a NATO lake with an extremely strong defense capacity. I mentioned Poland with the biggest artillery together with Finland. I mentioned the Zeitenwende that Germany has done in its defense. And if you look at the capacity of Finland on land, capacity of Sweden and in the air and sea, and the capacity of Norway in general, I don't see the direction of Putin going towards the Baltic Sea at all. What we need to do now, and I follow the words of Secretary General Stoltenberg, is that the more we support Ukraine now, the sooner we can end the war. Coming eastbound or westbound from a Russian perspective is not a good idea.
With so many leaders domestically within the alliance, how is it possible to send a strong signal?
Well, I disagree with your basic premise. We've just had Keir Starmer elected as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. I just spent a good hour with 15 senators, including also Chancellor Scholz, Prime Minister Starmer, Prime Minister Kristersson, and actually Jens Stoltenberg, discussing the security situation in Europe. I have never seen the European Union or NATO as unified or as strong as we have been ever since Russia attacked Ukraine. Remember that there's a long history of this, and that history began in 2008 with Russia attacking Georgia. It continued with the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula in 2014, and then a full-blown war in 2022. I think we reacted too late, but right now we're very strong and very unified. So I'm not worried that democracy would be throwing bad results at us. We're coping with it. Well, I'm avidly pro-American. I've done my undergraduate work at Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina in the end of the 1980s and early 1990s. So if there's one thing that I'm concerned about with the United States is the polarization of the political climate. It is, I have to admit, very toxic. But when I meet 15 senators, as I just did at the Senate, there is strong bipartisan support for Ukraine and also for NATO. And let me add that no matter who is elected as President of the United States, Joe Biden or Donald Trump, the United States will remain a superpower. And in order for the United States to remain a superpower and in the driver's seat in its pivoting towards China, it needs allies. And the strongest allies actually come from Europe. We are a value-based alliance, 32 members in the alliance based on democracy. The United States has roughly 60 allies out of 200 countries in the world. So any idea that the United States would be turning its back against Europe, I simply don't buy that. I think, as far as I understand, the text is in what they call and I'm learning this because this is my first summit, in a NAC silent procedure. So basically, it is looking quite good. I've read the conclusions through a couple of times, and I'm very pleased with the outcome from the perspective of the alliance, but also from the perspective of a new member state like Finland. En lue, vaan luen sitä sillä tavalla, että NATO eli liittolaiset tulevat antamaan vahvan tuen Ukrainalle 3 kautta, josta ensimmäinen on rahallinen ja materiaalinen tuki, toinen on koordinaatio- ja missiotuki ja 3. on sitten tuki, eräänlainen silta kohti NATO-jäsenyyttä. I hope all of you agree. I am quite convinced that that type of language, in other words, words such as irreversible and bridge, will be found in the summit declaration. Why is this important? Because the only thing that Putin and Russia understands is power. And Putin and Russia need to understand that what they expected to do, the exact reverse happened. They wanted to Russify Ukraine, it became European. They wanted to prevent Ukraine's EU membership. They will become members of the European Union. They wanted to prevent the enlargement of NATO. Ukraine will become a NATO member. Finland and Sweden became NATO members as well. No, edelleen niin lähtökohta on se, että kun nyt tapasin 15 senaattoria, myös ulkoministeri ja puolustusministeri ovat tavanneet kollegoitaan, niin olemme hyvin vakuuttuneita siitä, että riippumatta kuka valitaan Yhdysvaltain presidentiksi, niin Yhdysvaltain tuki Ukrainalle ja NATOlle jatkuu. Miksi? Koska se on Yhdysvaltain intressissä. Eilen keskustelin noin 10-15 minuuttia presidentti Bidenin kanssa, satuimme itse asiassa samaan jonoon ja samaan lämpiöön. Ja oikein hyvä keskustelu, analysoimme vähän maailmanpoliittista tilannetta ja hän kertoi näkemyksiään Suomesta, jotka olivat hyvinkin myönteisiä ja rakentavia. Hän puhui siitä, että Naton raja Venäjän kanssa on kaksinkertaistunut. Hän puhui siitä, miten vahva Suomen puolustus on ja hänen omista Suomen vierailuista. Myös taisimme puhua Vancouverin olympialaisista vuonna 2010, jolloin olimme katsomassa mäkihyppyä.
Tässä kokouksessa ei saada konsensusta siitä, että Ukrainasta tulee Naton jäsen. Siis Ukraina ei saa tässä kokouksessa kutsua. Olisiko Suomi ollut valmis kutsumaan jo tässä kokouksessa Ukrainan NATO-jäseneksi ja mitkä maat tämän konsensuksen estivät?
No, me olemme nuori, uusi jäsenmaa, eli me emme lähde mestaroimaan tai neuvomaan muita tässä. Me olemme valtavirrassa ja lähdimme pitkälti siitä, että toivoimme sanamuotoja, jotka vievät ja edistävät Ukrainan NATO-jäsenyyttä enemmän kuin Vilnan huippukokouksen sanamuodot. Ja tietysti muutamat maat olivat sitä mieltä, että pitää olla hyvin varovainen estämisen suuntaan, mutta kyllä mun mielestä se viesti tällä hetkellä on hirveän selkeä, eli Ukrainasta tulee NATO-jäsen. Ei nyt, mutta jossain vaiheessa. No varmaan suuri viesti tulee tämän deklaraation kautta ja se, että liittokunta seisoo vahvasti Ukrainan takana sekä taloudellisen että aseellisen tuen näkökulmasta, koordinoinnin näkökulmasta ja sitten loppupelissä myös siitä näkökulmasta, että Ukrainalle rakennetaan silta kohti NATO-jäsenyyttä. We'll take the last question in Finnish. Anteeksi? En ole vielä tuota uutista nähnyt tänä aamuna, joten en sitä sen enempää kommentoi. All right, thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, really glad to be here to celebrate 75th anniversary of NATO. But this is not about the celebration, not only about the celebration. And we have to do more in order to strengthen our alliance, which is one of the most long-lasting and credible alliances in the world. As for me, as a president of Lithuania, it's very important that the decisions which were taken last year in Vilnius are in the stage of implementation. We need to do more, and we have to spend more, because Russia's war in Ukraine is further complicating the situation. The security situation in the region is deteriorating. Russia's economy is working full scale to service war machine. And what is important also, we have to take note about the role of Belarus, the neighboring country of Lithuania, because this country is fully available for all kinds of activities of Russian Federation in order to destabilize the situation at the border. Right now we know how complicated is the situation at the border with Poland because of illegal migration and hybrid attacks against Poland. Recently, it was the case in other countries, in Latvia and Lithuania. So this is the reason why we have to spend more attention to the eastern flank of NATO. And the best instrument to do that is, of course, forward defense. Boots on the ground is the best deterrence factor in the eastern flank of NATO. I am really glad to say that we are very successfully working with our close ally Germany in deploying the full-size brigade in Lithuania, the process which will be completed in 2026. And this is a very good example and inspiration for our partners, for our allies to follow. For me, as a representative of eastern flank of NATO, it's very important that we go forward in increasing the defense spending, defense investments. It's very nice to see that our 2% club is expanding, but 2% as a threshold is not sufficient enough looking from our perspective, and Lithuania is committed to increase this defense spending up to 3% and in the coming years to do more. Very good that we spent the prior attention to the Ukraine, and I think this is very important that Ukraine receives positive signals comparing with Vilnius language of the last NATO summit. Irreversibility of the process is important. The bridge is important, but of course our friends Ukrainians expect more, and I hope that after the victory, there will be no question about full-fledged membership of Ukraine in NATO. So those are the issues which seem to be very important for us. And we, as I mentioned, we are glad to participate in this high-level summit and looking forward to cooperate with our allies in the future.
President Alzheimer, you mentioned the importance of Belarus as a Russian ally. In recent days, the Chinese troops have been training close to the Polish borders, working with their Belarusian counterparts. Isn't that a sad indictment of the failure of NATO, the West, the EU, the United States to isolate Russia on the international stage with key players such as China?
Well, it's very important to see the efforts of Russia to involve other countries in this war against Ukraine. And you mentioned Belarus. I didn't mention very
Good morning. It still is morning. It's great to see you all here in person. It's wonderful to have so many people here online from all over the world, and of course across all of our allies in Europe as well. And so it's my honor to introduce someone I've known a long time now, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. And I'm going to moderate a conversation with you in a moment, something you've called a pivotal moment for our alliance. I was going to start by saluting you on something I didn't know about, which is your great arm, because you threw out the first pitch of the Nationals game, and it was an amazing. Yeah. I was there in the heat, sweating while I was watching you. But it was an amazing salute to NATO. But having been at Mellon Auditorium yesterday evening, one of the most moving events I've been at, I'll instead quote President Biden, what he said to you as he gave you the Presidential Medal of Freedom, to a standing ovation, a really remarkable moment. He called you a man of integrity and intellectual rigor, a calm temperament in moments of crisis, a consummate diplomat. And I think the consummate diplomat, a person who can engage with leaders across all spectrums and across all nationalities. And I just want to salute you on behalf of everyone in the audience for more than a decade of the most extraordinary leadership. So let's start with that. So we at the Atlantic Council gave you our highest honor, the Atlantic Council Distinguished Leadership Award in 2017, and I consider that visionary. We knew you'd already accomplished a lot in your life, and I won't go through it all. You know, Prime Minister of Norway, all the things you've done for NATO and at NATO in terms of strengthening its defense, strengthening the defense spending, and I think it would take too long to go on that, and you're a humble man, and I don't think you would even want that. So I'm going to go right into the questions. You laid out 3 goals for this summit: increasing support for Ukraine for the long haul, reinforcing collective defense, and deepening global partnerships. I'm sure they're all important, but for this week, what do you consider most crucial?
I will answer that in a moment, but let me first say that it's great to be here, to be at the public forum, and many thanks to you, Fred, and also many thanks to all those who have organized and are making this event possible, because this is an important part of the summit, the public outreach, which this public forum is a very important part of. Then, thank you for your kind words. It has actually been a great privilege serving as Secretary General of NATO for 10 years. And I see around in the audience here, there are many people who have helped me, supported me. So many thanks to all of you for your advice, your help, and support throughout these years. Then, on throwing the first pitch, that is the most difficult task I ever committed as Secretary General of NATO. Not least because I've never been at a baseball match ever before. The first time I touched the baseball, actually, when I started to exercise for this, I thought it was a tennis ball, but it's not the case. So it was a very steep learning curve, and I think my future is not in baseball. I think my future is in something else.
I was going to say in the introduction that it showed that NATO always sets lofty targets.
Yeah. And we have to adapt to the challenges. Yeah. Then, of course, this summit, it's of course a summit we're going to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the strongest, most successful alliance in history. But the only way to truly celebrate that achievement, the 75th anniversary, is of course to demonstrate that NATO is adapting, that we are changing when the world is changing, because we are the most successful alliance in history, because we have changed when the world is changing, and now we live in a more dangerous, more challenging security environment, and therefore NATO is changing again, and therefore we will make important decisions at this summit for the future, not only celebrate the past. And there are three main issues: is deterrence and defense, is our partnership with our Asia-Pacific partners. But of course, the most urgent, the most critical task at this summit will be everything we will do and decide on Ukraine, because this is really the time where we are tested. If we want to stand up for democracy and freedom, it's now, and the place is Ukraine. I expect that the NATO leaders will agree a substantial package for Ukraine. There are fundamentally 5 elements in that package. One is that we will establish a NATO command for Ukraine to facilitate and ensure training and delivery of security assistance to Ukraine. It will be 700 personnel. Will take over much of what the US have done so far,
in leading the coordination of security assistance and training. It will be a command in Wiesbaden in Germany, but also with logistical nodes or hubs in the eastern part of the alliance, to ensure that we have a more institutionalized framework for our support to Ukraine. Then it will be a long-term pledge to support Ukraine, not least to send the message to President Putin that he cannot wait us out. Because the paradox is that the stronger and the more we are committed for a long term to support Ukraine, the sooner this war can end. So that's the thing we have to do. Then we will have, and we have already seen some new announcements of military immediate support with the air defense systems, with F-16s and all the things that allies have and will announce. We have the bilateral, that's the third, also the announcement of more military aid. Then we have the bilateral security agreements, 20 agreed between NATO allies and Ukraine. And then the fifth element of the package for Ukraine will be more interoperability. We will have a new joint training and evaluation center in Budgorz in Poland. We will have the comprehensive assistance package to help Ukraine implement reforms on the defense and security institutions to ensure that the armed forces are more and more interoperable with NATO. And together, the NATO command, the pledge, the bilateral security agreements, the announcement of new military support and interoperability, these 5 elements combined constitute a bridge to NATO membership for Ukraine. And later on today, we will see the language which we will agree in the NATO declaration on how to ensure that Ukraine is moving closer to NATO membership. So these are the 5 important deliverables on Ukraine that I expect allies will agree later on today.
Not to press you on what's actually going to be in the document, because of course you can't reveal that, but we saw at the Vilnius summit, hearing it again in Washington, that allies closer to Russia or more eager to provide NATO membership sooner for Ukraine. And no doubt the bridge and all the elements of the bridge are pretty impressive, including the new command. But are Ukraine's NATO membership prospects sufficient? We did our own wargaming with our Estonian partners in the Estonian government. We found almost under any scenario Ukraine was safer in NATO, that Russia would respond in a way that would be less provocative with it in than outside. What's your thinking on that, and have we gone far enough with Ukraine?
So first of all, the language you will see later on today in the NATO declaration, or the declaration from the heads of state and government, of course that language is important because language matters. It sets an agenda, it points a direction. But of course action speaks louder than words. So in addition to the language in the declaration on membership, which again is important, I think that what we actually do together with Ukraine is as important. Therefore, the fact that we now have a NATO framework, will have a NATO framework around the support, the fact that we have a long-term NATO commitment when we agreed the pledge, and also the fact that we actually are delivering more weapon systems to Ukraine, all of that is helping Ukraine to become closer to NATO membership. Because when we now deliver F-16s, we don't only deliver F-16s, we deliver the training, the doctrines, the operational concepts that will actually move Ukraine closer to being fully interoperable with NATO on more and more areas. So again, language is important, but the elements in the package I mentioned, they are actually changing the reality, enabling Ukraine to come closer to membership, so we can then, when the time is right, when we have consensus and the political conditions are in place, so when an invitation then is issued, they can become members straight away. I cannot give you a date because, as you know, there has to be consensus in this alliance on membership. But what I can say is that when the fighting stops in Ukraine, we need to ensure that that's really the end. Because what you have seen is a pattern of aggression. First, Russia annexed Crimea. We said that was unacceptable. After some few months, they went into Eastern Donbass. We said that that was unacceptable. Then we had the Minsk I agreement with a delimitation of the ceasefire line. That was violated, and Russia pushed the front lines further east, further west in Donbas in 2014. We had Minsk II, and the Russians waited then for 7 years, and they had a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, because Minsk II was in 2015. So we have seen a pattern where they've taken slices of Ukraine. So if there is now a new ceasefire, a new agreement, then we need to be 100% certain that it stops there, regardless of where that line is. And therefore, I strongly believe that when the fighting stops, we need to ensure that Ukraine has the capabilities to deter future aggression from Russia, and they need security guarantees. And of course, the best and strongest security guarantee will be Article 5. So therefore, I believe that a way to ensure that it stops is actually NATO membership.
Thank you for the very clear answer. One more brief question on Ukraine, and then we'll move on to Indo-Pacific. In a press conference you had with President Macron a couple of weeks ago, you noted recent gaps and delays and how they've led in funding and weapons and led to battlefield consequences. You said, quote, "We must give Ukraine the predictability and accountability it needs to defend itself." So 2 questions. Is everything you've talked about today that's going to be agreed enough? And secondarily, not just with uncertainties in U.S. politics, which exist, but also uncertainties in European politics, do you worry at all about the sustainability of that support over time?
So first of all, you're right that I have referred to, I also did that in Kiev in a meeting with President Zelensky earlier this spring, to the fact that during this winter and the early spring, allies didn't deliver on their promises to Ukraine. We saw the delays in the US, months agreeing a supplemental, but we also saw European allies not being able to deliver the ammunition and the support they have announced. So of course these gaps and these delays in military support to Ukraine, they created a very difficult situation for the Ukrainians on the battlefield. The good news in that difficult situation is that despite of the delays in our support to Ukraine, the Ukrainians have actually been able to hold the line, more or less. So the Russians have not been able to utilize these delays in really making any big advantage on the battlefield. Now we are providing more support, and I'm confident that allies will now actually deliver, and we see that, for instance, ammunition moving into Ukraine has been a significant increase over the last weeks. The purpose of a stronger NATO role in providing training and security assistance, the purpose of the command and the purpose of the pledge is, of course, to minimize the risks for future delays and gaps. But of course, you don't have guarantees, because at the end of the day, it has to be support in all the individual allied capitals and parliaments to providing this support. And at the end of the day, you have to go to the Congress, to the parliaments across Europe and Canada to get support. But I believe that when we turn this into something which is more a NATO obligation, a NATO framework, it is the threshold for not delivering will be higher than when it's based on more voluntary ad hoc national announcements. So the purpose of creating a stronger NATO framework is to make the support more robust and more predictable. It's also another part of this NATO framework for the support on the pledge and the command, and that is that it will visualize and ensure burden sharing. Because my impression is that, especially in the United States, there's this perception that the United States is almost alone in delivering support to Ukraine. That's not the case. When you look at military support, roughly 50% of the military support is provided by European allies and Canada. 99% of the support, military support to Ukraine, comes from NATO allies, but 50% of that comes from European allies and Canada. If you add economic, macroeconomic support, humanitarian support, the European allies are providing much more than the United States. So the point with the pledge is to ensure that we have some kind of agreed formulas for burden sharing, that we have more transparency, and also that we have more accountability, because then we can use NATO to count, to measure, and to ensure that allies deliver. It's not the same, but it's a bit like the 2% pledge. Because the importance with the pledge we made in Wales in 2014 was actually to give NATO a role to enforce and to ensure that allies delivered, and also that we agreed how to count and what to count. And that's also what we now do with the pledge, to agree how to count and what to count, and to give NATO a role to having also accountability. So again, there are no guarantees, but by giving NATO that role, I think the likelihood for allies delivering what they have promised will increase, and the likelihood of new gaps will decrease, and that's the purpose of giving NATO a stronger role.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. Let's go to China. This 2022 strategic concept, NATO strategic concept, recognized China as a challenge for the first time and the broader rules-based system. You've noted that Russia imports 90% of its microelectronics from China, which goes into military. Secretary Blinken today talked about 70% of machine tools that help the military coming from China. You've also said that if this doesn't change, as they're fueling the greatest armed conflict in Europe since World War II, allies need to impose a cost. Is it time for that? And what cost can NATO and NATO countries actually impose?
So first of all, I think it's important that we recognize the reality, and that's the first step towards any action. And that is that not only are Iran and North Korea important when it comes to enabling Russia's war aggression against Ukraine, but China is the main enabler. Because, as you refer to, they are delivering the tools, the dual-use equipment, the microelectronics, everything Russia needs to build the missiles, the bombs, the aircraft, and all the other systems they use against Ukraine. Well, I have said that. It remains to be seen how far allies are willing to go. But I strongly believe that if China continues, they cannot have it both ways. They cannot believe that they can have a kind of normal relationship with NATO allies in North America and Europe, and then continue to fuel the war in Europe that constitutes the biggest security challenge for our security since the Second World War. So this is a challenge for the alliance. Let's see how far we're willing to go as allies.
So we're getting close to the end of time, so just two other brief questions. First, Indo-Pacific 4, Australia, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand are here. Third time taking part in NATO summit, but it's going to be the first NATO joint document with this group. Can you give us some insight into what might be in it and any concrete outcomes?
Yeah. So first I would just say that the fact that we now are engaging so closely with our Indo-Pacific partners, Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and South Korea, that reflects a change in NATO, because that was not the case a few years ago. And as many of you may know, the first time we mentioned China in an agreed negotiated document in NATO is at the NATO summit in London in 2019. And in the previous NATO strategic concept, China was not mentioned with a single word. Now China has a prominent place in the strategic concept we agreed in Madrid. And the fact that we now are engaging so closely with our Indo-Pacific partners reflect, of course, the fact that we have to take China seriously when it comes to the challenges it poses for our security. And the war in Ukraine is perhaps the most obvious example, or as the